And today I'm just going to talk about some of the paid phone options that exist in VAN. VAN, of course, being a great tool to contact voters through a number of different methods, but one of the things that you can actually do through VAN is use a couple of the paid phones options. Now, what we're talking about today are the Predictive Dialer, robocalls, and Robo Surveyor. I'm just going to do a quick introduction about state voices. I'm then going to talk about each one of the paid options, what kind of sets them apart. I'm also going to run through checklists and setup for each one of them. I'm going to demo what they actually look like and how to interact with them as well. And of course, you can leave your questions at the end. So just so you are aware, State Voices, we are a national network of permanent, nonpartisan state-based coalitions, and we work to amplify the voices of traditionally marginalized and underrepresented communities, often referred to as the New American Majority. We do this by providing a variety of tools, organizations such as yours, of course, VAN, the voter file list matching. Please contact us if you ever have any questions about the data or the tools. You can also check out our website, statevoices.org. This is a map of our network. If you work in one of these states, you belong to one of the nonpartisan state-based coalitions I mentioned a second ago. Each state has staff associated with the State Voices network, and if you ever have any questions about the data or the tools, and you work in one of these states, your first point of contact is in each one of these states. So it might be a state director, maybe a data manager, but there is staff in each one of these states, and they're the ones you should reach out to first. If you're not in one of these states, you can reach out to us at a national level through the Tools for All program. We are a 501c3 organization, and we only work with other 501c3 organizations that have signed our MOU. Please do all work within the rules and regulations that govern 501c3s and follow any other federal or state laws that apply. One thing that I do want to cover today as well, just one note before we actually dive in here. I'm going to talk about a lot of these paid services through VAN, through interacting with VAN. But they actually do apply to outside vendors as well. Some of you in the future may want to use a vendor for phone banking, may want to use a vendor for robocalling, whatever the case may be. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today, like rules, list creation, laws that do exist, kind of how to actually use the system, will also apply there as well. But I'm going to do this all within the context of how it appears in VAN. These are the three different paid options that do exist through VAN. The Predictive Dialer, if you're not familiar with, it allows your volunteers to actually be on the phone, and the computer will actually dial for you. You do actually need a phone line to dial out or to get a call from. You need to be able to dial out from that phone, but you also need to be able to receive it. The system will actually call you, and then it will start dialing for you. So it's connecting your volunteer to live people. They're having conversations, and they're recording responses as they go. The robocaller is, I hope you're familiar with that. It's just a recording that sends out a message to a bunch of voters. And the Robo Surveyor, kind of exactly, I think, what it says there. Robo, kind of like the robocall, it's a message that's sent out, but because also the survey feature, you're able to record responses. The nice thing is about each one of these is that these are paperless. These are great ways of contacting lots of people. They will automatically dial the people that are on your list, whatever list you do create in VAN. So you're able to go through a lot of this. The costs can vary. So depending on which system you're using, how you're using it, how large your list is, it really can vary, so just be sure to check on that. There are other attachments, other documents that you can check on for that. And again, it is a great way of making lots of contacts, though, so that's something to kind of keep in mind when you are using this. The overall contact rate itself, though, can be low when you are using these. What I mean by that is, you know, if you have a list of 1,000 people and you're manually dialing them, it may appear you may get more people to actually talk to you, especially if you have like a live person talking, as opposed to a robocall. People just don't like listening to recordings, so the contact rate can be lower, but you're still going through a lot of people. You're still sending out that message to a large list of people in a very short amount of time, so kind of keep that in mind as well. This is just a little handy rubric that is available, that kind of shows you which options are available and what kind of separates each when using this. In the up top, you'll see in the first row, I do include the paper and virtual phone banks there as well. The main difference that separates that from the other three that we're talking about today is that these are paid options. You do have to pay for the time. Depending on which system you're using, you can record responses. Obviously, the robocall you can't. You may need volunteers, of course, for the predictive dialer. A little bit of an asterisk actually for both the robocall and the robo survey on that, because you may need a volunteer to record a message, kind of up to you. But just kind of keep that in mind as well. The other big difference between these is because we're talking about paid phone services, we have to talk about cell phone numbers. There are fairly strict laws that this is actually a law, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act actually has been on the books since I believe 1992, but it's only recently been enforced since 2012. And so there are some pretty hefty fines for robocalling cell phones. Van's system, when I create a list through Van, there is a scrubber that will remove likely cell phone numbers from the system, so it should remove most of these people. But keep in mind, again, so this is kind of one of those, if you're using an external vendor, talk to them about how they're going to remove those cell phone numbers. You will see kind of warning messages pop up from time to time when you are using certain aspects of this. If you are exporting phone numbers to send to a vendor reminding you of these rules, no one wants fines. We don't want you to get fined either. Just know that, when you're doing this, your organization is responsible for it and it's got to keep an eye on it. And it's also important just, when you are creating a list too, you're actually not getting the people with cell phone numbers. You're only going to get the landlines. It doesn't exclude that many people, but it's still a significant amount. You're talking depending on where and the type of people that you're trying to communicate with. Obviously, younger people probably list their cell phone number more than, say, older people. You'll get more landlines with older people, but statewide, I mean, I have seen, 10% of phone numbers depending on where depending on the geography. So it really can vary. For the predictive dialer, this is your checklist here. A lot of this I hope you are actually somewhat familiar with, and I don't mean like actually using the predictive dialer, but running a phone bank in general. If you're familiar with running a phone bank in general, of course, you need volunteers, phones, a script, a list. That's most of what you need to actually run a phone bank to begin with. For the predictive dialer, though, we need to be told because we have to tell Van to turn it on. It may not be on by default. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you don't have access to it, it's because it just hasn't been turned on. We need to tell Van to turn it on. It's not instantaneous. Please give us enough notice to actually set some of these things up, just like you would with a script, just like you would with usernames. Get to us early on that. You do need to set up an account to pay. That's just going to involve, a checking account or a credit card. It's like paying for anything else online. I'll show you how to do that at the end. Of course, creating a list, script, volunteers, and a computer. So for the predictive dialer, you're able to follow along. Your volunteers can follow along with the name, and you'll see it later. They'll have a name and a phone number that you're actually calling and the script in front of them, and they're able to actually record the responses on the screen as their calls are being made. And of course, you're going to need logins to actually access the system. So people actually do need to log into Van directly. Robocaller system, again, let us know. You may need extra access. Creating a list, of course, because you need to call someone, and you do need to set up an actual recording. The nice thing is this can be done through Van. I will show you how to do that. And the Robo survey as well, basically the same list as before, but it's nice to have a script actually loaded into Van. And so you can actually use this as the basis for the Robo survey script. When we actually create the script, you can create it from scratch, or you can import a script that's already loaded into Van as the basis for it. It's a lot easier to kind of use that as the basis rather than creating one from scratch, but it's entirely up to you. One question I do see here, people who have, I mentioned before with the cell phone thing, keep in mind that the cell phone restrictions do not apply if you're manually dialing. Each one of these systems are going to remove the cell phone number, so you're not contacting them here, but you can still throw them into a virtual phone bank or a paper list and dial them manually. But it cannot be done through an auto or robo dialing system. So that's how you have to do that. I'll actually show you how to split those lists in a second. We'll actually come to that later. So the checklist, just with any sort of scripts, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Scripts, I hope you're familiar with what they are. It's what you want to say, what you're trying to track. This is where your survey questions go, where your Canvas results go. By the way, the Canvas results are just as important. The not homes, disconnected, wrong numbers. For accounts costs, again, they do vary depending on which system you're using. And by the way, you will see this pop up. Robocall accounts and predictive dial accounts, these go to two different systems. They do not pay for each other. If you put money in the robocall account, that robocall account cannot be accessed for the predictive dialer. They're actually two entirely different systems. So just kind of keep that in mind. It is possible to transfer money from one account to the other, but we have to involve VAN, and that will take some time to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. And I don't know how easy it is either. So just kind of, I'm always a little wary on that process. So just so that you know that these things are different, just keep that in mind to begin with. The account creation, pretty simple. Again, checking account, credit card, like buying anything else online. The predictive dialer, so when you are talking about the cost that exists, it is per hour, per user, per transfer. I'll kind of explain what that means in a second. But when you are paying and setting this up, that's how much you'll have to actually put in the system beforehand. For the robocall, it will depend on the length of the call and how many calls you're making. For a robo survey, it's per question, length of recordings, and any transfers you may be doing. There is documentation that you can check out that does exist. Feel free to check that out. We should have documentation either attached to this GoToWebinar control panel. Hopefully, it's still there. And if it's not, we do have it in the GoToWebinar, or excuse me, in the State Voices training site. I can show you where that is at the very end. There's two things that I do want to talk about beforehand when we actually go into the setup. So there are model scores that may help you because we're talking about phones. There are some phones models. The connectivity and assignment scores exist in the system that can kind of help narrow your list of people to the people that you want to talk to. So the phone connectivity score measures how likely the phone number will ring. So on a scale of 0 to 100, how likely this number is to actually ring itself when you actually dial it. Basically, whether or not this is a wrong number or not, or a disconnected number or not, excuse me. It's measuring whether or not it's a disconnected or not. So you want to stay on the higher end of this. We'll see that in a second when we actually create a list. Assignment is hopefully kind of what it sounds like, whether or not this person is actually assigned this number. Again, 0 to 100 score, higher the better. And I mentioned splitting lists with cell phone numbers. Also in this module, you'll notice actually at the very bottom, this is where you can split your list between the landlines, the cell phone lines, or include both. With the payment earlier that I mentioned, this is just how the math works here. So when you are using, like say, for the predictive dialer account, you will want to, I mentioned that this is per user per hour. You'll want to create a list of people you'll want to create a list of people using that math here. So if we have 10 volunteers for 3 hours, we have 30 volunteer hours. But that also, when we're actually creating the list itself, you want approximately between 100 and 150 phone numbers per person per hour. So in this case, we would need 10 times 3 times 1. We generally use 120 as a guide, kind of somewhat in the middle, but you don't want to dip below 100. Which would give us a list size of 300 or 3,600 phone numbers. So when you are setting up your list, you want to make sure that there are enough phone numbers in the system itself to actually dial. And if you are running into trouble with the predictive dialer, usually the problem is one of two things. If the dialer stopped and all your volunteers are kind of looking around at each other, if they're all in the same place, I've seen it happen before. They'll just kind of start looking at each other like, I haven't talked to someone in a while. What's going on? Most common problems. There weren't enough phone numbers to actually dial, so your list wasn't big enough, and there's not enough money in the dialer, so you've already burnt through the money that you put in there. Just double check those two first. Those are generally the most common reasons if something is going wrong. You can always put more names in a list itself to actually dial. You can always put more money in as well. When we are looking to set this up, you will need to go ahead and create your list, and from the My List page, this screenshot's actually just slightly out of date. They actually just changed the screen over to a new little setup, but everything is still here. So the calls icon is what you'll use after you create the list, and you're just going to follow each one of the setup options here. With that, let's go ahead and actually show you how the system works. All right. So before I actually dive into this here, let's take a stop over at phone services. You may not necessarily see all of these if you don't have access to them yet. Again, that's one of those things where if you don't see these and you need to use them, contact us first. We may need to just kind of figure out what to do with your settings. So we also may need to turn on the predictive dialer accounts. The accounts themselves, by the way, predictive dialer account exists here, robocall accounts exist here. Just click on whichever one you want. You can check your current accounts here that exist. I don't have anything in this account, which is fine because I don't actually make any calls using this account. Same thing with the predictive dialer account here. I should have some money, I think, in this one. No, I don't. I lied. So I don't have any money here. Setting up an account is pretty easy. Just go back out to this page here. You can create a new predictive dial account here. Oh, and it's moving slowly. That's not good. Just give it a name. That will actually, once you create the name, it will literally pop up here. Then you can go into the account itself that you just created, and you can purchase more minutes. You'll also be able to purchase more minutes at the time of if you need to when you're actually setting it up. So purchase minutes, add a checking account, add a credit card account. You're literally just following the steps on how to set up a payment system here. So, card type, if you chose bank account, that's how you can do that there. And by the way, within the predictive dialer, let's go ahead and pull up an old one here. 0 callers, 0 minutes remaining in my account. So if you do have any left, you can just check that here. We haven't actually dialed any here either. So you can always just kind of keep an eye on that there. So that'll tell you how to set up the account there. That's how you set up the account there. That'll also help you keep an eye on it. There's a little bit of a delay. So, if it is running low and you think you're going to run out probably in the next 15 minutes, keep an eye on that, and there might be a slight lag in when it actually does run out versus when it shows it runs out. Just keep that in mind. It shouldn't be much, but just that happens from time to time. All right, let's create a quick little list here, mostly to highlight a couple of the setup options here. Oh yeah, the phones module. Connectivity score, assignment score. So I showed you these earlier. I'm just going to check off the top 3 of each one. I can also, so right now I'm including likely cell phones. I can exclude the likely cell phone exchanges, which is what I actually want to do. If I don't do it here, it will do it once I go into the predictive dial setup in a second. So my list of people, let's go ahead and just hit preview my results to see how many people. This will be a statewide list, not all that relevant. So 3.8 million people. Almost 1.8 million phone numbers, but let's exclude likely cell phone exchanges. So let's just get the landlines. All right, we didn't lose too many, but we still lost a decent amount. So we're down to 1.57 million phone numbers. We did lose quite a few, but not many. So we still have plenty of landlines we can call. The cell phones, we would want to put the include likely cell phones only. We'd want to put these in, of course, the virtual phone bank or a paper list to actually connect with them. So let's go ahead and keep this here, exclude likely cell phone exchanges. I want to, I need to narrow, no, wait, no, I need a household first, excuse me. I mean, household, this is the thing I need to show you. Now, because we're throwing, now obviously there's a little bit of a math problem here. We have more people than phone numbers that exist. Simply put, of course, more than one person can have a phone number on the file. What we want to do is we want to narrow this down to one person per phone number. That way the system doesn't dial them twice. It will show me two different people, but it will have dialed the same household twice. And we want to avoid that to avoid making people angry. So let's be sure to do that. Now, unfortunately, you are having the computer kind of pick whichever person is going to be dialed first. So, you do have that little bit of a trade-off, but it's far more important, I think, to kind of make sure that you are only actually dialing one person per household. And then we'll go ahead and I'm just going to narrow this by, we'll say 3,600. So 3,600 unique people. This is kind of using the example earlier, the 120 phone numbers times the 3 hours times the 10 volunteers. That was the math earlier that I showed you. So we're going to stick with 3,600 of unique phone numbers. All right. So 3,600 people, 3,600 phone numbers. We have unique people and unique phone numbers to actually start dialing. Let's go ahead and set up each one of these. The nice thing is with each one of these, again, we're going to come back to the screen every time we set this up, and we're going to use this setup wizard to do this. Now, setting each one of these up is pretty simple. We do recommend using the phones and computer campaign. You can use a phones only option, but it's harder, it's limiting. Your volunteers have to remember the responses afterwards. Also, as a result, your script has to be actually shorter. By the system actually limits the number of questions you can actually ask. With the actual computer and phones option, you can have a longer script. You don't want to ever go crazy with your scripts because no one will ever get through all of them. But you're at least not limited to 2 or 3 questions max. If you want to have a couple other activist codes or a couple other things in there, it's a little bit more dynamic and easier to follow along. So you have a computer screen in front of you with the script. You got a phone up to your ear. Go ahead and next. Let's give it a name, 2017, October 11th, dialer, 2017, October 11th, dialer list. let's make calls. I'm only filling out the required ones right now. And script. Now, setup wizards are usually pretty easy in Van. You just follow along. You see these tabs up top. We'll get to each one of these. Right here, campaign name, list name, invitation title, and script. Those are the only things required. You can include more information if you want. This is internal. Only you will see this. This is internal. Only you will see this. This is external. Your volunteers will see this. In fact, this is what they're looking for. When your volunteers are ready to make the calls, they're going to look for text that says, in this case, let's make calls. So whatever you put here is what your volunteers are on the lookout for. By the way, the transfer down here, this is if you want to do patch-through calls. Hope you're familiar with this tactic. Of course, when you're talking to a volunteer or a voter and you ask them, hey, do you want to be connected to your legislator about issue X? They say yes, you can hit patch or transfer. It will take that voter that you just called directly to that legislator's office, and they can talk directly to that person about that issue. So this is where you'd put in the number to be transferred to. So this would be the legislator's office here. Let's go ahead and hit next. If you're familiar with the virtual phone bank setup, this should be hopefully pretty straightforward. You're just going to choose what you think is most important for your volunteers to know when they're making the calls. I'm going to include some information here. Whether or not this appears above or below the script, kind of up to you. Below the script, I think it's usually kind of set as the default. It's a little easier if they need more information to find this info below the script that they're looking at rather than looking at it and then having to scroll down to the script itself. Editable displays. If you are collecting email addresses, if you're collecting, let's say, cell phone numbers, if you want them to take notes, you have to check this off here. It is not enough to check this off here. This will just show them. If you want them to be able to actually add information to the record itself, you have to check off the information down here. Let's hit next. Need a start and end date. So we'll go ahead and we'll say PM, and I want to do 9:01 PM. Why? Because I wanted the system to yell at me. So it's going to warn me, 9 o'clock. It's not going to allow me to actually call anyone. The system will shut down, and if my end time is after that, it won't let me do it. That is local. You don't have to, if you're on the West Coast, you don't have to convert this to East Coast time. It should be local time wherever you are. So just change it to 9, go back. Now here's where you need to choose the usernames. I mentioned that you do need usernames to actually log in. Just select the users that you want to have access to it. By the way, this includes my account here. I set it up, but I don't necessarily have access to call into it yet. I need to actually assign that. Hit next again. Choose the payment with the account that you set up earlier. There's no actual minutes here, obviously, because, well, I showed you that earlier. And we're not making calls, so that's fine. If I do need to purchase more minutes, I can actually follow this back here and set that up. Let's click next and approval. Terms of agreement here. So please read this over. Know what your responsibilities are. If you agree, check off this box, hit finish. All right, and as you can see, it's starting to load the data. So what I need to actually do is log out and log back in. Let me go to the main menu. When I log back in under quick tasks, that text, let's make calls, will appear. Let me go ahead and log out, log back in, so give me a second. The system itself is actually sending to kind of an outside dialing system. It's through Van, quote unquote, but it actually, it says it's loading data. It's literally sending it to a different system to start making the calls. So it's just kind of, a connection here. All right, I've logged back in, and under quick tasks, we see the text, let's make calls. Again, when your volunteers are ready to start making calls, they just click on this. You need to give them a phone number to dial. I'm going to enter my cell phone number. So follow the instructions when you see this. It now It thinks it's calling me, although as you can see from the warning screen, we have not put money in the account. It's not doing really anything. So I would need to correct that before I could actually use it. If there was money in the account, if we were actually using this, it's calling me, I would pick up the phone, there'd be a voice on the other end, a recording walking me through some instructions, welcome, thank you for using the system. When you're ready to start making calls, it it just times out, it thinks I picked up. You click start calling, it will start dialing through that list. When a voter on the other end of the line picks up, a name will pop up here along with some of the other additional information. When that beep occurs and that name pops up, your volunteers need to go right into their script down here. Hi, my name is. I'm calling from State Voices. So here's our script. When are you planning on voting? We've got drop-down boxes. How will you be voting? You're just going to record the responses for each individual. There would actually be like a next call button down in the lower right-hand corner, I believe, and you'll go on to the next caller. Your volunteers just need to keep the phone up to their ear the entire time. They don't need to dial back in. You don't need to log out and log back in between calls. Keep the phone up to your ear the entire time. The system will dial and it will patch through people who have called or who have picked up the phone and are ready to talk. They're just going to see a name, go through the script, mark down the responses, go on to the next caller, and repeat. On occasion, some of these dispositions do come into play. Sometimes, someone else in the household you're not looking to talk to picks up, click not home, you can go on to the next caller. Whatever the case may be, some disconnections get through, some answering machines, not many. It should mostly be live callers. When you are all done, then you can hang up the phone, go back to the main menu, and you're all done with the phone bank if you're a volunteer. But the important thing is when your volunteers are using the system, just keep the phone up to their ear, stay in front of the computer, mark down responses as they come in, and you'll be able to get a lot of your volunteers will start churning through that list pretty quickly. So it's only going to patch through the people that actually pick up. That's the predictive dialer. Let's go back to my list. Let's take a look at the Robo caller. So again, we've got our list of 3,600 here. Give it a name. I need a caller ID number. I'm going to put in my cell phone. So when it does dial out, this ID number is what is actually going to pop up when the call goes out. So you have to actually have control of the number. There is an 800 number that will pop up. It's not necessarily an 800 number. It's I don't even know if it's a toll-free number. You'll have to confirm that you actually own the number. They don't want to make sure that you're not just putting in a bunch of zeros so that no one can actually trace the call. You do have to actually own the number, so you will have to verify it. My cell phone's already verified through the system, so I'm good to go here. You'll need to choose a recording in the system. Now, I've already got this recording in here. You can choose live recording, one here, so if they actually pick up the phone, they can get a different message than if it's the answering machine here. Or, as you can see, it can be the same recording. It doesn't have to be different, but you do have the option of having two different messages here. Let me actually show you what new recording looks like. So actually setting up a recording is pretty easy. That 4-second message that you saw there was one that I actually set up through here. I just had it call me, so I gave it a name. I actually had the system call me directly, so it just called my cell phone. I followed the instructions, and it was recorded in there. I can put a max length in, So if I say 5 seconds or 30 seconds, remember the longer the call, the more expensive it will be. You can also just upload a file if you already have one. You can actually send the recording information to someone remotely. It will actually email the information to them. When you're all done though, you can just go back to the screen, select the information. Schedule, date, time, hopefully pretty straightforward here. Robocalls will go out pretty quickly, so you don't need to put too much time on here. Test number, I find it's always good. In this case, I'd put like my cell phone in here, but you can actually include the test number in the call list. It's good to kind of seed it to make sure that you know that it actually went out. You'll get actually a call when the robocall is going out. You can just kind of pick it up, and you have that little reassurance there that yes, the robocall went out. Hit next. Now I need $36 to have this go out. It will actually stop me here because I don't have enough money. So here's where I could go and purchase time. I don't need to go any further because you've already seen the approval page. It's the same thing as before. So this will start to get a little bit repetitive here. So again, you just choose the account, pay for it, go to approval, read through the terms and conditions, agree, and then it will go out at the time that you designated. You don't need any volunteers other than maybe one to record a message. Pretty straightforward there. Let's go back into our list. Whoops, oh dear. Hit the wrong one. Calls, Robo survey. Setup's looking pretty familiar here. Don't worry, we won't go through all of this again, but 11th, Robo survey. Again, caller ID. You will need to, of course, verify your phone number. My cell phone is already verified. Okay, now we need to make a choice. If they get an answering machine, here's the message that they'll get, which is the 4-second message we had before. Now this is a Robo survey. This is actually going to ask them questions. Press 1 for this answer. Press 2 for this. It's going to record those responses. So we actually need to set up a separate script for that. I have one already in here, but we'll go ahead and actually go through the process of setting up a script here in a second. I'm not coming back to this page. Schedule, test, payment, approval. You've seen all of those before. There's no difference. I don't need to go through that again. It's the same thing you've seen before. Let's actually click on New Script, and let's set this up. 2017, 11th, Robo survey script. I can include a description. This is all I need to do to get started. Just give it a name. Click Next, and I can build one from scratch. But as I alluded earlier, I find it easier to actually use, where's my training script? Right here. As you can see, I do this a lot. Let's go ahead and actually use the training script that we had before from the Predictive Dialer, very basic. By clicking Next, it's actually going to take all of the elements here and import it. So when I scroll down below, time, name on list, obviously that's not great. It's a robocall, it's not going to know, so you'd want to change that up a little bit. My name is, and I'm calling from. Here's our first question. Each one of these has direction. Each one of these elements are broken up a little bit here too. Now an element, for the terms of scripts, is basically just a section. An element, the different sections that are in here are divided into text, survey question, activist code. So we've got a bunch of text here. First element, direction, go to next. So when we're done with this element, we go to element 2. When are you planning on voting? This is a survey question. Press 1 for morning, 2 for lunch. And for each one of these, next, it can branch. So if they say, in this case, if morning, press 1, let's actually create a new text element. So if they're going to vote in the morning, that's great. Polls open at, say, 6 a.m. Obviously, this all varies from state to state. 8 a.m. Please remember to bring your ID. Click add. Every new element that I add, so in this case I added a text element, gets tacked onto the bottom. I can't pick up and drag and reorder these, and it's kind of irrelevant actually to a degree, simply because these things can kind of hop around anyway. But this can get a little bit confusing if you're not keeping track of what you're doing. So press 1 for morning, go all the way down to 7. If they press 2, 3, or 4, it goes to next. Element 3, how you'll be voting, same kind of thing. Press 1 for a response. Press 2, each one of these say next. Element 4, what issue is most important? Same thing, next, 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 next. Volunteer, 1 for yes, 2 for no, next. Member, press 1, next, press 2, next. Now, unfortunately, we do have a little bit of a problem here, though. We've added a text element here for a reminder. What we actually want to have happen here, so this is where things can kind of branch out. You got to kind of have a little bit of a plan here. My script really kind of ends after this. Really, I would want normally a thank you message here. So let's actually delete this element because I can't rearrange these things. Let's just add thank you for your time. This call was paid for by insert org here. Okay. So now this is actually down here. Thank you. Hang up. Anything that gets to element 7 is going to do whatever recordings here, which is the thank you and paid for by, and then it's going to hang up. Now I can change this up. Let's go back up to the top. Let's put the message in here we had before. Polls open at 6 a.m. Please. Your ID. Okay. So if they say morning, press 1. Want this to go down to element 8. So element 8 now is down here. The only way to get to element 8, this call ends if they go just linearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it ends here. The only way to get to 8 is by pressing 1 on that one question, and we need to go back up to 3 to rejoin the script. So we're kind of bouncing around here. How are you planning on voting? Let's say they say absentee. I want a message in there. The deadline to return your absentee ballot is in 1 week. Obviously, you want to include the right date there. It's just a demo. This really varies from state to state. Okay. We've got a new one, element 9. Anything that makes it to element 8 is bouncing back up to the top. We'll want this to go to element 4, and I need to make sure that, where is it? Right here, element 9. So the only way it gets to element 9 is if they press 2 here. If they press 1, it goes to the next one, which is the issue question. Same thing with this, a volunteer, membership, and then thank you and hang up. So this thing can kind of branch out a little bit. It can skip around depending on what you're trying to do. Each one of these elements needs a recording. The way that you actually set this up is by including a recording on each one of these. If one of these does not have a recording in it, you have not actually done this. You've not actually completely set it up. When you're all done, you can click Save. Yeah, I know I haven't actually set this up. It'll actually take you back. So I guess I lied. We did see this one more time, but just to show you, it takes you right back here. Just complete the process, and then it will go out at the time that you designate. Keep in mind, again, I mean, it is a survey, but it is also a recording. So again, contact rate can be, small, but if you don't have the volunteers to actually make the calls, this is, kind of sometimes a good workaround if you've got the money to do it. Let's go back out to the main menu. So those are the 3 different systems that I wanted to show you today. If you have any questions after today or need more help, we do have the training site here. If you log into VAN, there is a training site with a list of other webinars we conduct, other documents, including, by the way, the price sheet should be located in here as well. NGP VAN has a training site as well that may be of use to you. And if you do have any other questions after today, you can always contact your data manager, or you can email us at tfasupport@statevoices.org. Thank you very much for your time today.